Ladies and gentlemen, do you remember a time when motorcycles looked like something Jules Verne would design after a bottle of schnapps and a long argument about symmetry? Well, buckle up your leather boots, because today we're diving into one of the most ambitious, elegant, and over-engineered two-wheelers ever to clatter through the cobbled streets of Europe. The magnificent Zündapp K800. A motorcycle so smooth it once balanced a coin on its engine while idling. Try doing that with your cousin's lawn trimmer. And before we tuck our trousers into our boots and roll off into Bavarian engineering history, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. If you enjoy stories about machines with more personality than your boss and more steel than your neighbor's bunker, yes, I'm looking at you, Bob, then this is your garage away from garage. Now, onto the tale of a motorcycle that was smoother than a politician during election week and almost as expensive to keep running. Back in 1933, Zündapp was in a bit of a pickle. The German motorcycle market was crowded, competitive, and every manufacturer from Berlin to Bavaria was trying to get a slice of the two-wheeled pie. Zündapp, founded by Fritz Neumeier in 1917 and based in Nuremberg, had about 5% of the market. Not bad, but not enough to brag about at your local beer garden. So what did they do? They launched the K-Series, a family of shaft-driven motorcycles ranging from a polite 200cc to a full-throated 800. And the K800? That was their flagship, the crown jewel, the tuxedoed gentleman in a parking lot full of dungarees. Behind this metal marvel was engineer Richard Kuchen, whose resume was thicker than my fishing stories. Kuchen designed a 4-speed gearbox using chain drives instead of gears, smoother, quieter, and the envy of mechanics everywhere. This wasn't just innovation, it was engineering poetry written in grease and chrome. The K800 debuted with a horizontally opposed Eclat 4 engine, a configuration that was virtually unheard of in 1930s Europe. It was designed for wealthy civilians, government agencies, and anyone who thought a sidecar was the height of romantic travel. And with Germany's economy recovering and the Reich in full propaganda swing, you better believe Zündapp was eager to sell a technical masterpiece that looked good flanked by flags. Production started in late 1933 with just 185 units that year. But by the end of the decade, they'd made around 7,500 of these bikes, with about 2,600 for civilians and nearly 5,000 adapted for military use, called the K800W. That's right, the Wehrmacht used them too, though not always happily. It turns out sending a bike with silky gears and no rear suspension into Russian mud was, let's say, optimistic. Now let's grease up our curiosity and take a wrench to the technical side. At the heart of the K800 was that glorious flat-4 engine, initially 797cc, later nudged to 804. Power started at 20 horsepower but crept up to about 22 horses at 4,300 revolutions per minute. Some whispered of 26 horsepower, but we'll chalk that up to showroom exaggeration and motorcycle magazine optimism. The engine had square bore and stroke dimensions of 62 by 66.6 millimeters. It was unit construction, engine and gearbox in one case, so fewer leaks and more rigidity. The single carburetor, first a Pallas, later an Amal 22 millimeters, sat nestled between the cylinders, feeding them like a bartender who knew everyone's order by heart. Ignition came from a 6-volt battery coil setup with centrifugal advance, while a 6-volt dynamo kept the lights on and the mood romantic. The clutch was a 3-plate dry type, robust like a German handshake. Now, that 4-speed gearbox by Kuchen? Genius. Internally, it used chains instead of gear teeth. That made shifts smoother than Bob's explanation of why he hasn't paid his HOA fees since 1997. And the shift lever? It was mounted on the side of the fuel tank with a little ball knob, Kugelschaltung, they called it. Fancy name, satisfying click. From gearbox to rear wheel, power flowed through an enclosed shaft drive with bevel gears, no greasy chains flapping about like your uncle at a wedding. Shaft drive was rare in the 1930s, only BMW and a few eccentrics dared, but Zündapp went all in. The frame was pressed steel, a Kastenrahmen or box frame, with no tubing in sight. Strong, modern-looking, and with enough room to tuck in the tank. Front suspension was a leading link fork with twin springs and, eventually, oil damping. The rear? Rigid. Your spine was the suspension, but the saddle was spring-mounted, so as long as you weighed less than a side of beef, it helped. Wheels were 19 inches, shod with 3.50 front and 4.00 rear tires. Brakes? Mechanical drums, cable-operated, adequate for the time, though adequate back then meant pray ahead of time. Sidecars sometimes got a linked brake because stopping 580 kilograms of steel, rider and passenger with front and rear alone was like trying to slow a train with a loaf of bread. Controls included floorboards instead of pegs, a comfort move that made it feel more car-like. And with a long wheelbase of 55.3 inches, 1,045 millimeters, the K800 was a stable cruiser. Length was about 7 feet 1 inch, 2.17 meters. Width 2 feet 8 inches, 0.8 meters, and weight ranged from 440 to 475 pounds, 200 to 215 kilograms. Fuel tank held 15 liters, about 4 gallons, and it sipped gas at 6 to 6.5 liters per 100 kilometers, or roughly 36 miles per gallon. Not bad for a bike that could pull a sidecar full of dreams, suitcases, and in-laws. Top speed? Between 68 and 78 miles per hour, solo, that's 110 and 25 kilometers per hour, and about 59 miles per hour, 95 kilometers per hour. When dragging a sidecar and your cousin Franz. Ride quality? Let's just say you didn't need an espresso. You'd be awake by the time you hit the second pothole. But all joking aside, what really made the K800 special was how ahead of its time it was. A flat-4 shaft-drive motorcycle in 1933? That's like launching an electric hovercraft in 1972 and wondering why no one else gets it. Now let's talk about how the K800 looked. Because believe me, this wasn't some slapped-together hodgepodge of tubes and bolts. This bike was a full-blown metal sculpture rolling down the road. The pressed steel frame gave it a sleek modern silhouette that wouldn't look out of place in a Fritz Lang film. From the fishtail exhausts to the integrated tank shrouds, every angle whispered, "I cost more than your house." Civilian versions typically came in glossy black with gold pinstriping, very Art Deco, very "I own multiple hats." Meanwhile, military K800Ws were dipped in field grain, lost their chrome jewelry, and gained boxes, racks, and a no-nonsense attitude. But even in uniform, the K800 couldn't help looking refined, like a butler drafted into a bar fight. Compared to its contemporaries, the K800 was basically a spaceship. BMW had their Boxer twins, but they didn't touch the four-cylinder smoothness. The British had singles and the Ariel Square 4, but no shaft drive. Americans? Indian and Henderson were big but brutish, with exposed chains and agricultural charm. The Zündapp felt like a proper machine for cross-country touring without getting tarred and feathered by road grime. That said, it wasn't perfect. Its rigid rear made bumpy roads an exercise in dental rearrangement. Its weight and narrow tires weren't made for off-roading, and if your rear spark plugs fouled in the cold, which they did, you had to pull over and perform surgery in freezing mud. But the engine lasted, the gearbox was durable, and the shaft drive was basically witchcraft. In many ways, it predicted what Honda would do with the Goldwing 40 years later. And now, folks, the part that makes collectors sweat and spouses roll their eyes, the price. Back in 1935, the Zündapp K800 retailed for around 1,550 Reichsmarks. That was roughly $625 in United States currency at the time, equivalent to about $15,000 today. Not including the sidecar, mind you. That was extra. But let's face it, if you were buying one, you weren't clipping coupons. Fast forward to modern times, and oh boy, a solid unrestored example might fetch $30,000 to $40,000 if most of the parts are there. A well-restored solo bike? You're looking at $50,000 to $70,000. But wait, there's more. In January 2023 at the Mecum Las Vegas auction, a fully restored 1938 Zündapp K800 with an original Stoy sidecar sold for a staggering $187,000. That's right, almost $200,000 for a motorcycle that predates World War II. Today, only a few hundred K800s are believed to survive worldwide. The ones in museums get polished more than the curator's glasses. The ones on the road? They get worshipped, and rightly so, because despite its quirks, the K800 is one of the most unique motorcycles ever built. A flat-four masterpiece with shaft drive and style for days. It wasn't just ahead of its time, it was in a different time zone. Now go check your garage. If there's something in there with a pressed steel frame and a hand shifter, congratulations! You either own a K800 or a meat slicer from the 1950s. Subscribe to the channel for more adventures in tiny wheels, big dreams, and questionable decisions.